Project Herpetoculture, I think 90 something. We're almost at 100 now. I feel like I'm like right at the cusp of 100. And today, Andis Arietta. Andis, thank you for coming on the show and taking some time to have a convo with me. I want to just let everybody know that the way this came about actually is you listened to the interview that I did with Dan at Amphibicast, and you reached out to say, hey, like, I'd love to talk about this. This is the area in which I work. This is my wheelhouse, as it were. And so I got really excited when I got that email. So I'm really glad we could make this one happen. Can you just give me and any listeners a brief overview of how you fit into herpetoculture and what your research looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a weird niche of herpetoculture and AI, which I think is the topic that we're probably going to dig most into, because it's kind of the most interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's a weird niche, right? Herpetoculture and AI tend not to intersect all that often. And I think it's probably worth giving like a little bit of the long version of my trajectory to understand why I got there. So
please do.
My, like everyone, liked animals growing up. But then I ended up I hated like math and to some extent STEM when I was younger, and ended up deciding to go to this little hippie college for a degree in liberal arts. And that ended up focusing over that time in kind of environmental philosophy.
Amazing.
And so I have a bachelor's that's environmental, it's in the environmental field, but it's philosophy focused. And that took me then to working in Alaska for the better part of a decade doing nonprofit work, doing environmental conservation and research. And what I found over that period of time, well, one, I lived on this, island with like 14 miles of road in Alaska. Really hard to keep any exotics there. So I didn't have any animals at that point, even though I kind of always had that itch.
Yeah.
What I realized doing that management work was that I was kind of interested in the science behind the management decisions that we were making. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go back, do my master's, went to University of Montana studying animal movement ecology, also within an environmental studies department. So still very much like kind of large context environment focused. And then that got me interested in thinking about kind of the more abstract metapopulations and genomics, and what are the consequences of how we change the landscape scale things, what are the consequences on populations, on ecology, on evolution. And that took me then to do my PhD at Yale, studying kind of genomics of metapopulations. And I studied, this is like kind of relevant because it still is frogs, although it's not like a pet frog that most people keep, but I studied wood frogs, which are the most wide-ranging species in North America, I think probably by landmass in the world. And they're really cool because they can freeze thaw in the winter, reanimate, but they're also a great model system because they're vernal pool amphibians, so they have these really discrete populations. At the time, we didn't have a genome, but we sequenced the genome, so we had a reference genome and could do some cool genomics work on them. I got to do some really cool field work, work with from all across the continent, even did a field trip floating the Kobuk River, 2 weeks unsupported, flew in on the gravel bar, floated the Kobuk River out, and collected some of the most northwestern samples of wood frogs ever recorded, ever collected. So yeah, it was very cool, and got me kind of back into herps, like doing that work. And then during my PhD, got a couple tanks because I'd always wanted dart frogs, fell in love with it. I'm a foster parent. We had a child placed with us, and
that's amazing.
Take apart my frog room, which was just my office and a couple of tanks, for a nursery. So kind of got out of it for a little while. My kids are a little bit older now.
Yeah.
So I've just kind of gotten back into it. And throughout all of that time, also because of the kids, I was going to be doing a postdoc and realized that I just couldn't survive on an academic salary.
Yeah.
So I went into still in a nonprofit, but now I work for an education nonprofit as a senior data scientist. And so I do a lot of machine learning, causal inference, and AI work.
Incredible. Did you keep herps when you were a younger person, or before, when you did? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had like a Florida soft shell, I had green tree frogs, and at that time, Tarifa granulosa, the Oregon newts were all over the place. So I kept those. But yeah, I mean, not like super hardcore. This was back in like the early 90s, so it wasn't a ton.
Sure.
I think I probably had smuggled some brown and olds from Florida back up at some point.
We've, I think all of us, when we were kids, before we understood that there were laws in place for that sort of thing, we probably all did it to some degree. one degree or another.
I'm hoping time will hold me in indemnity now. No one's going to come at me from fish and wildlife.
Yeah, for sure. Probably unlikely. That's a wonderfully cool trajectory. What is it? Maybe if you can elaborate a little bit on like what draws you to not just maybe it's two parts. So what draws you to herps and wild, specifically wood frogs, right? As a what drew you to them in the first place, and then what drew you to keeping stuff in your home?
Yeah, well, wood frogs was mostly just a convenience. You know, in science we tend to work with like model species, and so like rats are model species for a lot of like human work. Yeah, for plants it's well, actually, I don't know what it is for plants, but like zebrafish is another good one. Nematodes are for, you know, a lot. We just have these model systems that kind of like we work with enough so that you can isolate out a lot of the natural history variables. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing ecology work, it's a little bit hard because you need a species that's somewhat tractable in the lab, but also you're trying to test natural history. Like you're trying to test ecology, so it needs to be something that operates that way.
Sure.
And what I was interested, like the whole formulation of that was, I was interested in very kind of concretely, like what happens when you build a road through a habitat?
Yeah.
What are the consequences for these two populations? And it's really hard to do that with like large mammals, you know, brown bear that are traveling around, low populations anyway. But wood frogs have basically the same thing if you think about it. You know, you've got these like two populations that there is some introgression or some gene flow between them, but for the most part, they're still kind of discrete. So they just work really well. You can raise them in the lab. Honestly, my PhD, I raised like thousands and thousands and thousands of tadpoles from eggs. We would excise individual eggs out of the membrane and then raise them in individual well plates. And like every year it was thousands and thousands. And that actually kind of depressed my desire to like care for animals for a while.
Excuse me.
But in general, just like all the species that I like and that I end up keeping, it's just really because I like their natural history. Like I just love learning a lot about them because you can see them, interact with them, and even doing field work, like you just don't see them as intimately as you do in like your home setting. You know, when you have like a tank right by your office, you just notice so many more behaviors.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like to keep lots of different species. I really only like wild type species of things, largely because I like the natural history. And that's why it's just like a learning environment all the time that is more interesting than my TV.
Yeah, for sure. Most definitely. Well, that's an interesting thing to ask the question, what happens when you build a road through a natural habitat, right? Because I think the way I hear this talked about most often, like broadly in herpetoculture, is people sort of use it as like a way to kind of fight back against regulation. They'll say, well, you don't want us to collect a small number of animal X to work with indoors, but you have no problem building a housing development through, 10 square miles of natural habitat, which is like fair argument, like totally fair issue to raise. But I think that the issue of what happens when you fragment natural habitat has a lot more nuance to it and has a lot more downstream effects. So, for example, just as an example, I've heard conjecture, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard conjecture that habitat fragmentation and genetic isolation as a result could be one of the reasons that we see maybe a higher prevalence of like weird mutants pop up in people's backyard, right? So we see an albino garter snake pops up in somebody's backyard. And it's like, yeah, that probably would have happened anyway. Obviously, it did happen anyway a long time ago because people had myths and legends about them, right? But it's also, is it happening more often because of habitat fragmentation and resulting genetic isolation? Or is it just that we have more people with fancy smartphones with cameras on them that can take a picture of it when they see it and put it up on the internet for people to notice, And I think
there's a third option that is, that would just relieve some selection pressure for things like a very ostentatious white animal that now no longer has crypsis, but you put them in a suburb and there aren't as many.
Yeah.
Predators. I mean, I just think there's a lot of, I don't know if I would say that it's necessarily, I think that amphibians and reptiles in general are pretty robust with respect to isolation, genetic isolation.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see it way more in like large charismatic megafauna.
Yeah.
Just because population sizes are low, breeding is less explosive in most cases and more selective among them.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think your main point, which is that roads, like the linear road itself, is just a fraction of the environmental impact of a road.
Yeah.
But I think that is really like a huge thing that people don't really think about. But even like just the concrete area of roads in the United States could pave North Carolina. Like we have a lot of roads.
Yeah.
And if you then think about, like, that's just the road itself, but then that bleeds over, right? There's like road salt. There is mortality from road crossings. There is just obliterating landscapes because you've had to, fill in a vernal pool to be able to build a road. Right. And then there's ending, once you build a road, then you have bleeding impacts from that, like logging, development, It just kind of goes on and on.
I mean, even just like the physical presence, right? So, changing the way drainage goes in a specific area, changing the way things can migrate and move in a specific area, changing the temperature of a specific area and animals' access to temperatures at different times of day. This is the reasons, when you hear all the time about people road cruising lizards that have fallen asleep on the pavement, I mean, all of this stuff I think has impacts that we don't, fully understand. And part of the reason I'm interested in this in general is because I'm interested in I've been calling it liminal wildlife, right? So wildlife that sort of thrives inside of our, in some sort of porous way exists in and among our settlements, right?
Yeah.
This stuff interests me a lot because I feel like that particular cross section of wildlife can have really positive, informative effects on herpetoculture and what we do. But I would love to know some of the more subtle ways that you see in your research that a single road can change what's going on in a natural population. Can you give a few examples of the things that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with wood frogs specifically, there's a couple of, I think, really areas that people have been doing a lot of research in. One of them is road salt. So probably not something you have to deal with in your neck of the woods, but in the Northeast,
No.
You grew up they're dumping tons of road salt, right? And a lot of these vernal pools, especially in the Northeast, they're pocketed all over the place. They're right next to a road. They're immediately within the drain shed. So we have 50 vernal pools in the study system that I had worked in. Mm-hmm. And some of those were right next to the road. Those ones that were right next to the road sometimes were as salty as brackish water.
Whoa.
The frogs do largely okay. And I think that's because, wood frogs, there's a reason why you can find them from North Carolina to the Arctic. They are a robust organism. I think that it's probably because there's a lot of localized evolutionary trajectory. I think they can evolve pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
Because of this kind of metapopulation type system, and because they have really short generation times. The other one is audio ecology. So a lot of frogs, right? They're breeding synchronously because of the calling. So the ponds thaw out, a females get in there, and you'll have this kind of quorum effect where it's almost like a gravitational pull. The more frogs, the more males come, and then the more females come. So you get this really profound effect of being able to hear, the sound shed.
Yeah.
When you're next to a road, that can totally mess with that soundscape. Absolutely. So those are just a couple from frogs, but there's also, lights are a big issue. Where there are migration paths over roads, that's also direct mortality is a big issue. There's just there's a lot going on. I will say that the other thing, this is kind of tangential somewhat to road ecology specifically, but we just talk about things that are in this kind of liminal space.
Yeah.
Which I think is also a pretty ripe field of study called urban ecology. That one of the most interesting bits of research, I think, ever is Herman Arietta, who is a researcher. He's a Swedish researcher at Uppsala, but he did a lot of his work in the Chernobyl exclusion zone.
Oh, hell yeah.
Blew up in 86, right? Everything was excluded out many miles from the reactor. So he has permits to go in and do research. And one of the things that he studied, he originally studied Areitta frog and went in and started studying the tree frogs that are native there. and did a transect from like outside the exclusion zone, kind of up as close as they could get to the reactor.
Yeah.
And the thought going in, I think, was that like the closer you get to the reactor, you're going to find like frogs with 3 eyes and that are like purple or whatever. And it turns out that he like almost couldn't find anything.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there's a little bit of like melanin production closer to the reactor.
Yeah.
But like population-wise, just raw ecology metrics, the ones closer to the reactor are doing way better. The ones inside the exclusion zone are doing way better than the ones outside.
Yeah.
Because like that, it's just the development is kind of for most species, the development is the problem, right? Like they can handle so much more than we think they can handle if we just give them the ecological latitude and kind of like some space to do it.
Yeah. I love this. There's a few things that this takes my brain and my headspace. One of them is that, I talk all the time about how if, you have this subset of, you mentioned being very interested in wild type herps when you kind of in your brief description of your own past. And, I fall in the category of being kind of in the middle of everything in that regard. I love I'll never not love a wild type ornate Uromastyx, but I'm also not going to turn up my nose at some triple inverted striped weirdo that, happens in 100 years. Like I'm also interested in that. I think it's really cool, extremely interesting, extremely informative, like, very artistic in a lot of ways. And anyway, the reason I mention that is because, even if someone's preference is like wild type or pure species or locality specific or what have you, I think stuff like this Chernobyl exclusion zone and other examples of urban ecology, as you said, show that like there's clearly so much more happening with regard to what looks like a selection pressure and what looks like success and failure in sort of like an unbounded evolutionary context, in the sense that even if you collected your animals of species X from the same square mile of road and went to every ends of the earth to provide them with as close to the natural thing as you could possibly get them, we are imperfect selection mechanisms, right? Like we don't really know what to look for, and we're going to be choosing for things that we don't fully understand. Which is again another thing I've talked about a lot is the which I'm sure you're intimately familiar with, which is the Soviet fox domestication experiment, right? And I feel like there's some talk. I've heard interesting takes on how these were not actually wild foxes; these were from a fur farm, and that changes things and all of that. That's totally fine. I don't know enough about that to say much about it. But what I can say is it feels like the main takeaway from that particular bit of research is like there's all these things that we don't have any idea that we're going to be selecting for or choosing for. So many downstream effects that there's no way, we don't have enough information to anticipate what those downstream effects look like. And, obviously this can kind of cut in both directions. That can have really negative effects. But I feel like, I get a lot of hope and it makes me feel warm inside when I see, well, actually, everything there is kind of kicking ass. That makes me feel really good. You mentioned the wood frogs being highly adaptable, right? Like their turnover generationally is so quick, so rapid. Their resilience is already there. Like they have all this resilience, they have all this quick turnover. Well, it seems to me like things are going to push them to be successful in whatever new environment they find themselves in. It doesn't mean it's let's go nuts and just pave everything, right? That's not what I'm saying either. I'm just saying that I find that to be an interesting, hopeful piece of information. What you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does. I think that in some cases it is hopeful because I think that it shows us that if we make some smart management decisions, species are pretty good. Most species are pretty good, right? But I think the problem is that you get into this scenario where it's like how many we never care until the population is small enough that it's almost at a precipice. Yeah. Wood frogs are different because, there's a lot of population, there's a lot of range to absorb some perturbation from what might be kind of an average or typical. But when you get down to a population that's really small, really isolated, then it doesn't take very much because you don't have that much variation in the population, right? To be able to actually absorb that. I mean, there's some great examples. So this actually was my research, was thinking about rapid evolution and how that influences ecology.
Excellent. Yeah.
For the longest time, we never really thought about evolution, thought about it on like dinosaur scale. We never really thought about it as happening fast enough within generations that it could actually have an ecological impact, which then the ecology drives evolution. You can have these kind of like carrier effects, right?
Really fast feedback loops too, right?
Yeah, some super cool herp examples. I mean, one of my favorites is Colin Donahue, who is a friend. He did some research looking at anolis in the Caribbean islands and found that after hurricanes, the individuals that are left tend to have more lamina on their feet and tend to have longer limbs, largely because they were like able to hold on to branches during hurricane force winds.
Oh.
And then in Texas, also with anoles, Shane Campbell Staten had a paper after a big cold snap that showed that the mean thermal physiology of the anole population was more cold tolerant afterwards, which kind of makes sense intuitively.
Yeah.
Think about like if you've got a big population, you're going to have a lot of space underneath that curve, and we always just think about the mean. Right?
Yeah.
But that variation is what actually matters for this scenario, because even if you only have a few here on the tails, then if the world gets warmer, then maybe the few on that tails is fine. But the problem is that like with climate change, the concerning part is that if you go through and winnow out all but that one tail, and then the next year, your climate cycle, you actually needed all the ones on this tail. That's when that perturbation, you have to have. That's when it can be deleterious in the end.
Sure.
There are tons of examples, tons of really cool examples of where evolution is helping species.
Yeah.
But for every one, there's a million examples of where like we are doing more damage than they ever have any hopes of recuperating.
Yeah, for sure. And so, actually, before I forget about this, would you be willing to get me in touch with Colin? I'd love to have a conversation with him as well.
Yeah, it would be hilarious. I don't know. So he won I forget what they're called, but like Congress has like a Darwin's Award type thing for like research that they think is dumb, basically. Yeah. And he won that one year because basically the way he did that research was to take different diameter dowel rods and put them in front of a leaf blower with a net behind it, and then just put the knoll on there and basically just like keep cranking up the leaf blower until the knoll just whoosh, went back into the net. But it is really cool research, but it sounds from the outside like you can see how he has no idea about like how empirical research works.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, you did.
Foundation is funding this. Why?
You did what? Yeah, no, for sure. I would love. Yeah, if you think that he'd be willing to, I that just sounds like another interesting person like yourself who I'd love to have a conversation with if they're open to it. So that would be awesome. So. Okay, I love this. This is some great background. There's a lot of cool stuff to talk about here. Can you now tell me a little bit about how all of this intersects with AI and where that comes into the picture?
Yeah. Well, so my PhD, I did a lot of genomics. Genomics is like genetics on steroids. So it's like sequencing whole genomes, processing whole genomes. To be able to do that, you kind of have to know a lot of computer science because you're just working on supercomputers all the time.
Sure.
And then also, just with any biology, probably any STEM, by the time you get into a PhD, like you're just dealing with math and numbers. Like that's a really cruel joke about people who like wildlife biology is like by the time you get your PhD, you're doing 99% of your time just sitting in front of a terminal doing statistics.
Makes me want to.
So I ended up learning all these kind of these ancillary skills of statistics and computer science. Mm-hmm. And then I was also kind of my generation of PhD was really the first when people still aren't really using machine learning, but I started using it was kind of on the forefront of using some machine learning. Not on the forefront, but like in ecology, there weren't a lot of
early on. Yeah,
early on using some machine learning algorithms. And then when I parlayed that into my career as a data scientist, because I had already been doing machine learning, had already been building neural nets, like kind of knew how generative AI worked. When generative AI came on the scene, then I just kind of became the de facto expert in that.
Yeah.
From there, I realized that I think because a lot of us in this field, like herpetoculture, environmental, we just tend to have a knee-jerk reaction against a lot of technological modernity, which I think is understandable in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But I saw that as like a potential problem and pitched a course here at Yale to the graduate school in the environmental studies department on a practical AI course, because I teach them like data visualization courses already here.
Amazing.
And it was really well received. And we largely just focused on like, if you're going to be making policy in the environment, if you're going to be doing environmental management, even if you're just like looking at ecology, what do you need to know about AI and how can you use it?
Yeah.
And from that, then that's kind of inspired me to, because I had to get in the weeds and I changed my own position on a lot of things as I did the research to teach that course and had conversations about that course. When I've seen conversations that other people have, especially in herpetoculture, you know, like on the Facebook forums, I don't really want to engage because that's not a great place to change people's minds. But what I see is that a lot of people are interacting with this conversation. The rhetoric is mostly somewhere between like knee-jerk negative reaction and superstition. Yeah. And it's very rarely calibrated to kind of what I think are the values that people tend to think. Like the values that people have that AI rubs along the wrong way, I think they don't actually calibrate AI's risk-benefit against those very well.
Oh, yeah. First, man, brief tangent. I have a former coworker who I had lunch with yesterday or day before, and I feel like, so he and I are both, you know, you are clearly like your research is focused on a very specific. You have great expertise range in this area, right? And my friend and I are the, you know, just sort of like hobbyist generalist types. You know, like it could get into tiny amounts of nitty gritty on a wide range of topics, but it's surface level knowledge, right? And we have, I feel like our entire conversations over the last 6 months to a year have all been him, and he won't, this is not bashing him at all. He'll understand, him just saying, here are all the reasons that AI sucks and it's not what everybody thinks it's going to be. And I don't really see any real use in it. And isn't it going to kill us all and whatever. And I've just been the other guy on the other end of that. Like, you are all completely off and this is going to be utopia. And obviously I'm wrong there too, but you know, so can you elaborate just a little bit more about the ways in which the way this can apply to both herpetoculture and conservation biology and ecology, and the ways that people tend to get these things wrong, the biggest errors that you see that come up for you?
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, I think that people often, it's hard to say what people are going to get right and wrong, because a lot of times we are inferring, we're projecting into the future, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like, and one of the very first thing that I show in that practical AI course is a bunch of illustrations from the Victorian era about what people thought the future was going to be like.
Yeah.
And you see, like, you look back at them and you're like, that is absurd. Of course that was never going to happen.
Yeah.
But at the time they thought it did. And I think that just having that perspective of like, you can't imagine, like, when you're having these conversations right now, you're having this conversation about like radio in the Victorian era, or you're having this conversation about the internet in like 1985.
Yeah.
Or you're having this conversation about writing in, like with Socrates, right? Like Socrates hated writing because he thought it was going to make people lazy. And at that point, you know, the oratory was such an important part of the dialectical of education. Yeah. Like erudition was oratory at that point.
Yeah.
And I kind of think we're there. Like I was a little bit disappointed in our generation. I'm assuming your generation too, but like my generation, who lived through the internet bust, because I think people thought like, oh, this is going to be the end of everything. Like libraries are going to totally going to go away. Like, no way. Right? Libraries have not gone away. In fact, libraries are even more important now because now we're managing way more information.
Yes.
Librarians have maybe shifted from being the person who like knows where to find a book to even being more of an expert on helping people to know, like, how do I verify out of billions of sources of information? How do I verify what is true and good and useful?
Yeah.
Who is synthesizing this for? So I think that is it's just useful perspective. I don't know that anyone's necessarily wrong, because who can be wrong about predicting the future?
Yeah, well, we won't know.
I just don't know that it's like well calibrated in what I think that it's more superstition than it is like an honest diagnosis of where we're at today and where we likely will be.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So I come at this, you said you had a liberal arts background initially, like for your undergrad, right?
Yeah.
I went to a local college here in Colorado got my bachelor's in fine arts and studied with a focus in illustration. And so the way I come at this often is from the angle of new advents in terms of artistic media. So the advent of photography, the advent of digital image making with the raster and vector image making, Photoshop and Illustrator and whatnot. And the same thing, or even if you just go as rudimentary as, well, we did all of our painting with oils for how many millennia, and now we have acrylic paints. Oh my gosh, it dries instantly. You're going to become the most lazy painter. Everything's going to be so easy for you. You really have to do it with the oils because that's how you learn and do it properly. I say things about how I talk a lot on the show about how the advent of photography in the traditional art world was seen as a major threat, and yet you had all of art history happen inside the space of photography just in the first 100 years of its invention and use, and as a media in the first place. And that's where I think as you said, that's where we are right now with kind of understanding and thinking about what AI might look like in the future. The friend who I spoke with yesterday, there was all, he was like, well, don't you think it's a bubble? Like, isn't it just like a big AI bubble? And I'm like, well, like that was the .com bubble. Everybody said the same thing about the internet, and they weren't wrong. Like, the investments weren't wrong to be placed into the internet. It was just, we didn't have enough information and knowledge to understand exactly how it was going to unfold, which is extremely exciting in my opinion, because especially where this overlaps with herpetoculture, well, that just means that this is like ripe for the creative mind. Like, get in, there's going to be so many interesting, creative ways that AI comes to affect every aspect of the things we do in the world in ways that we just don't know yet, because there hasn't been some 15-year-old kid who grew up talking with GPT or Claude and figuring out how to get them to do cool stuff because they can do 90% of your labor, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think a lot of it, like, we can take the internet as a great example and just think about how much the internet did for herpetoculture.
Yeah.
Like, the information share, we are a tiny niche, and being able to connect with people, I think, totally changed a lot of the herp world. Like, my dad was kind of into herps, and one of his first was a horny toad lizard.
Yeah.
Right? Like, mail ordered it from the Southwest somewhere, and then had to mail order ants and stuff. He didn't know anything. No one knew anything. And nowadays, you can just immediately ask someone or look up an old forum and get some of that information. And I think that it's probably going to, I do want to back up some, but I think for me, the most prosaic way that AI is going to be useful is just, instead of having to dig through a million forums from 2012 or whatever, and then synthesize it yourself, because a forum is only as good as the information put into it, right? Sometimes it's old, sometimes it's an inexperienced keeper, but if you can imagine taking all of that information, synthesizing it, and then coming up with an answer, that's going to be way better than the amount of time that you could even spend in an hour trying to figure that out.
Sure.
And also maybe pulling in other sources and other information. I think that's going to be the most prosaic way. If your frog has a prolapse and you're like, what do I do? That could take you half a day to figure that out. And your frog is probably going to be, already have some necrotic tissue. Whereas you could ask that to even a modern day, more agentic, a thinking version of a lot of these models. And it will give you a pretty good step on how to go through it and solve it. And
totally.
The nice thing about it is that, unlike a forum, if something goes haywire, you can say, what's going on? Whatever.
Yeah.
It's dialectical, right? It's not just one way. I don't think that's going to be really useful for people. It's going to get some things wrong always.
Yeah.
But again, I think AI has the least amount of risk when it's a domain area that you already know something about, because you can know what's up and what's fishy. If I were going to ask it about, I don't know, physics or something, I probably wouldn't know. It could spin off all kinds of bullshit. I would have no idea. But if it tells me something about prolapse in a frog, I have enough base knowledge to know something is fishy. I need to check the source or do whatever. But you can do that. It's always an option. It's going to be, you'd have the same problem. Sorry, I keep getting into these more and more tangents. But I think
this is awesome. This is great.
AI is that people compare it to being perfect.
Yeah.
When what they need to do is to compare it to the alternative. So if the alternative was me to call up someone, even an old time mentor who's with I don't know, like there's a million things that you wouldn't do. Like raising kids is a great example.
Yeah.
If I were to like call up my grandma who has tons of experience about my child who isn't sleeping because he has like, teeth coming in, she'd be like, just dip a rag in some whiskey and rub it on his gums, right? Like that is also not good information.
Yeah.
Just because you have a lot of experience and you're an expert and have raised many kids doesn't mean that you're necessarily like the most up to date.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of, take the average of what you would get if you just anyone who you would ask that question. Yeah. Does the AI like hit the average or exceed it a little bit better? And I think in most cases it does.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases it just always won't. And that is also where people get tripped up because there are certain classes of things that LLMs specifically are good at and some that they aren't. So I feel like I brought a bunch of topics. I think we actually like probably should back up a little bit.
Sure. Let's back up. Yeah.
So I think like one of the things is that people just AI is like this very loose term, which is a problem for one. So AI is generally just like anytime you apply non-animal cognition in a computer. So like an if-then statement in an Excel spreadsheet, like your thermostat technically probably is a little bit of an AI.
Yeah.
But that's not what we really talk about. Like inside of that bubble, there's machine learning, which is like, if AI is like, you train a robot to go forward until it hits your Roomba, go forward until you hit a wall and then make 90-degree turn.
Yeah.
Machine learning is just when you can't program in the rules. The rules are too complex, so you need to learn it from the data, and that's machine learning. Right. And then within machine learning, there's kind of a separate set of a type of models called neural networks that are just taking really, really, really complex stuff and making it into an abstraction. So like a great example is computer vision neural nets that are like diagnosing cancer, right?
Yeah.
It's taking very complex image, sometimes multiple different types of layers of images.
Yeah.
And then it's abstracting it down into like a yes, no, cancer or not.
Yeah.
Or maybe a probability, but it's taking it and making it an abstraction.
Right.
Then we get into generative AI, which is just taking that lots of complex stuff where we made it into an abstraction and just reversing the process. So you take an abstraction and make it very complex.
Yeah. Right.
So you can take like, what is the next step in the embedding space to actually generate a word and then to generate a conversation and all those things.
Right.
And that's usually what we talk about. The new kind of era of AI is like agentic AI. And that's what if you interact with ChatGPT thinking or the newer versions of Claude and Gemini, what they're doing is they're actually having kind of a bunch of different models, or maybe it's just one model, but intuitively you can think about it as a bunch of different models that are asking the question of how do I answer this question? Do I need to grab a tool that's specifically for code or like making logical inference? Right. Do I need to grab one that translates? Do I need to go out to the internet and ask questions and then maybe do it iteratively to say like, here's an answer that I have. Is that right? Let's double check. And then finally synthesizing that all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just to like clarify, like that's what people are talking about. And I think they often don't know. And people often get confused with that AI level where they're asking like a stupid model, a question it's not designed for.
Right. Right. For sure. I think I see them a little bit as like instruments on some level. They remind me of like just a musical instrument, something that you have to regularly tune and tweak and adjust. And you'd never try to play a drum set on a violin, right? Like it just wouldn't make sense. So on some level, you're trying to pick and choose what model you're wanting to mess with based on sort of what your goals are and what you're trying to produce, and one can ask questions in a way that, and I know maybe I'm taking us back, jumping ahead just a little bit here, but, like one way that I use different AIs now is to help me become better at picking foods for the animals that I keep. So I'll ask questions like, okay, based on what you understand, do you think this particular food that I have no idea what this green is. I found it at this Asian supermarket here by my house. They're calling it this. I don't know what that is. Is this something I could feed my uromastyx? And then it'll give me an answer. It's like, well, this is probably this kind of plant. And here's what you want to consider in terms of whether or not it might be suitable as a treat. Maybe it'll say, hey, definitely don't feed this. It's toxic. Maybe it'll say like, yeah, this is perfect. But then you don't just stop there, right? You probe a little bit further. This is where the tuning comes into play. It's like, okay, I'm going to say, all right, what are you basing this on? Point me to all the top 3 places you were using to gather this information. Give me a link to where you went. And then I'll say, all right, well, like, look, these are sources on a care guide from Reptiles magazine from 1992. This is basically dog shit. This is nothing. Like, what can you tell me about this plant based on a chemical comparison to a wild allegory that these animals eat in the wild? And then give me the links to where you're getting this information, right? And then you can just continue to push it further and further and further. And as long as you're at least modestly critical, right? I mean, it's the equivalent of you see a headline and you could just tell someone the headline you saw, or you can follow it. You can follow that breadcrumb trail to the end and say, oh, this came from some interview that somebody supposedly did 25 years ago. I have no idea if this is relevant or true or accurately transcribed. Like, do I give this any validation or credit whatsoever? Maybe not, right? Yeah. And so I think maybe I'm getting off a little far from what we were initially talking about. No, steer me back onto the course here.
No, I mean, I think that's totally right. And like what you're describing is the way that I try and get people to use it more.
Yeah.
Augment your own intuition, how it basically do things faster for you that you would probably ordinarily do yourself.
Yep.
And to me, that's usually a good tool. And the reason why I tell people to do that is largely because what people get confused because they think that a neural net, because it sounds like us, because it's trained to sound like us. It's trained to sound correct. Models are not, in general, large language models are not trained to be correct. They're trained to sound correct. They're just next level predictions. It turns out that because we have so much information encoded in the syntax of our language and the semantics of our language, like, you can answer a lot of things correctly just by predicting the next word. It's actually phenomenal how much we actually encode into our language. But it's a byproduct. It's not the main thing, right? And that's where I think people get confused because they try and map on their intuitions of general knowledge of a human brain to general knowledge of a computer brain. And that is not the way that LLMs work. So, for instance, even older large language models can ace the LSAT and they can ace the MCAT, right? Like, I don't know if I should say this, but I would bet that within like no time, you will be better off sourcing a model for like a law question or a medical question than you will a lawyer or just because it has so much access to so much more information. And can synthesize so much more.
Yeah.
However, even the most advanced models right now, if you tell it to spell the word Tootsie Pop backwards, we'll almost always get it wrong.
Right.
Some of the thinking models will get it, but it'll take them like a handful of iterations. And that's because, so like, if you met a person who you knew had their medical degree and they were a lawyer, it would blow your mind that they physically could not spell a word backwards.
Yeah, for sure.
If you have an intuition of like what your general knowledge,
you'd be like, what is going on here? You know.
This is what Ethan Molnick, who is kind of an AI like an AI researcher, they call it the jagged frontier. And that's like, you have it's an imaginary frontier that you map onto humans. It's pretty smooth. It's like, if you can ace the LSAT, you should probably be able to do lots of things encompassing spelling words backwards. AIs that's just not the way they work, right? Like, that is not a next word prediction problem. That is a come up with an algorithm to do it problem.
Yeah.
You're asking for like to analyze it and evaluate it. And so the more thinking models now will say, oh, this is an analytical problem. I should actually send this out to a code interpreter and to spin up a quick model that just reverses words and then give an answer.
Right.
But because it sounds so simple, most of those models will actually get tricked into thinking, and they'll give you an answer, but if you look at it, it's actually spelled incorrectly a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people have such problems, because they'll ask a Tootsie Pop type question, and then they'll just give up and be like, oh, this thing is bullshit. It's totally wrong. Like, it's never going to get anything right. And it's like, well, no, but you just asked it. Your intuition of its knowledge is not very good.
On some level, like, the harder question you ask it, the more interesting answer you tend to receive.
Yeah.
You ask it some pretty complicated questions, things that you're like, I don't really have, something as stupid as like, what's the meaning of life? You get some pretty interesting answers. They're weird. And I love what you're saying. I love this idea because it is exactly like Herp on some level, in the sense that we bring to the table so many assumptions and priors that it can, your expectations really obscure your ability to view what you're looking at objectively. which is why it's so, as you said, with regard to AI, it's so important to compare it to the alternative or the average. So I guess this would be the sort of the electric car, or the self-driving car argument. It's like, well, yeah, okay, sure, we have self-driving cars that maybe kill 4 or 5 people a year, but we have people that kill tens of thousands of people every year. And it's like I feel like it's a much better trade-off. And so but they just remind me like a herp. How many people's relationships with their first pet reptile or amphibian, it's just obliterated by this complete mismatch of expectation and the sort of reality that you're given with this weird other kind of consciousness, right?
Yeah, which is I think it's probably even worse for an LLM, because at face value it seems so similar.
Yeah,
speaking your language, has perfect syntax.
Yeah,
but at least with a I don't have a bearded dragon. Like, was an example.
Sure.
Like my tegu, right? Like my tegu seems really intelligent, but I actually can probably apply my theory of mind. Like I could probably use a little bit of critical anthropomorphism to infer some mental states and some observational capacity, because we actually do share tons of evolutionary history, right? Like phylogenetically, we're just like tiny little branches at the tips. So
you're closer to a tegu than to an LLM, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like it's probably more like thinking about like what does an octopus see versus what you see, right? Like two camera eyes that like evolved in parallel.
Yeah,
they look very similar from the outside, but like I bet that if you could take and somehow project whatever an octopus sees, it would be so foreign to you.
Oh yeah, you'd probably just throw up. You'd be like, you just vomit, because your consciousness doesn't know how to take in all of that added information, right?
Even if you have the same eye, like an octopus's brain is oriented, just think about the tactile orientation, like just the way that brain is evolved would just be totally different. So I think that is probably more kind of like an LLM. Like it looks the same, you think it should be the same, but there are some like foundational divergence that are very basal, very deep, that don't let us back.
You almost can't help but feel like you're texting with a person. It's like it's just so it hits that you really just blasts through that whatever goofy imagination we had of a Turing test. It's just absolutely obliterates it. It's not even close. Like the Turing test wasn't even not even close to sufficient to describing what might actually be conscious, right? Because it's like you would think you could easily be deceived. Like, there's a dude on the other side of this. Like there's a guy somewhere over on the other side of the country that's typing back to me right now. Or something.
It's too smart.
Yeah.
Although I actually do think I think that people who grew up natively in AI world will have a much better intuition for that.
Interesting.
There's a great example. Eliza was a bot back in the, I want to say 70s. I can't quite remember. So it was just like a bot that would say, basically repeat your question back to you.
Yeah.
And there was the guy who invented it, his secretary, was convinced that it was sentient.
Sure.
And you can go and use an Eliza emulator now. And nowadays you'd be like, are you kidding me? Of course it's not real. But even then, people's grandparents all the time get scammed by these scam emails. Totally obvious to the rest of us, just because we've already built that muscle for recognition. And I think that probably my kids are going to have no problem. They're going to be able to see it from miles away. Oh yeah, that's not a person, that's AI. Yeah,
for sure. That's hilarious. That secretary for the Liza bot, that's like the 1970s version of the it was like a Google engineer or something who left.
Totally.
Was like, oh, it's a living thing. I promise, it's alive. It's like the same thing.
Yeah,
that's so interesting.
100%. You learn so much. This is like the liberal arts background. You just learn you applying a little bit of history into these things and some perspective shift. Gets you pretty far in tempering your both tempering what you think will happen and also your confidence in what you think will happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So one thing I do think we probably should get into, and I don't want to force our conversation anyway.
No, force it. Let's go.
The thing that I think people are going to be frustrated about in an environmental conversation is I can just hear a bunch of people saying, I don't care if AI is right or wrong. It's destroying the environment just by being an industry or whatever.
So how does the rubber meet the road here?
Yeah, I do think that that is worth thinking about. I'm curious, in your friend who you said had all the reasons, what are some of his reasons and where does that fall on his hierarchy of his litany of horrors?
Well, just to be, I want to make sure I say this in the most respectful way imaginable, because I love the guy as much as I disagree with him vehemently. But he basically takes it's a combination of what you said before, which is he's anticipating perfection. And when the AI doesn't get it absolutely perfect, it's like, I just can't trust it anymore. It's like nothing gets everything right. Nothing. Your friends, your mom, your whatever you're reading on the internet, none of it's you're never going to get 100% accuracy. It just doesn't exist in a statistical sense, right? It's just not real. And then the second part would just be an Eliezer Yudkowsky perspective on the doomer, the P-doom side of things, right? It's like this just the paperclip maximizer times 10. We just don't know. It's all of these things that we just don't have a handle on. It's just going to sneak up behind us and slit our throats. And so I would say that those two perspectives might sum up the bulk of his criticism. And again,
so I don't know if your audience is going to know all this, but like that's like the existential risk problem, right? Like
sure.
If you take one thing and extrapolate it out, like that's the Nick Foster and the paperclip maximizer. It's like if you invented a bot that just its main goal is to make paperclips and then gave it unlimited resources, like eventually the universe would just be paperclips.
Yeah, right, exactly. And the AI might elect to say that, oh, we need all of the iron in your bloodstream to help make these paper clips, right?
Yeah,
and we're just going to, it makes sense. Let's just nix all humans, right? They're gone. So this is the thing that I would say, this is the broad criticism that I hear from him generally, which is, I mean, it's legitimate. I don't, there are ways in which it's hard to, there's a logic to that line of thinking that really does make sense. But again, coming from the liberal arts perspective of it, this is a perfect example. Okay, so this is great. He would say something to the effect of, well, I wouldn't want to know, I wouldn't be interested in, I wouldn't be interested in a story or a painting that I knew was made by an AI, right? And I'm like, all right, well, okay, first of all, let me just make pretty clear that you probably have already been duped. Like, it's probably already happened that you've scrolled by a beautiful painting or read an interesting story, listened to an interesting podcast that was entirely AI and you were unaware, wholly unaware, right? And then the second part would be the thing that I would say about like digital painting is, even if, I would say, oh, I would make this great picture and people say, oh, what media? And I would say, oh, Photoshop. And they'd say, oh. And it's like, what do you mean, oh? Like, the canvas was blank when I arrived, ma'am. And this is true from my view on the creative pursuits inside of AI. The canvas, like, I don't care if I'm the prompt. I'm that domino and I tipped the domino. There's reams and reams of art in art history where the artist attributed to the work is the tip of I just hit that first domino, and I had the rest, all of my students make it. I had elves make it, which is an art term, right? Andy Warhol had elves. Like I had, people had ghostwriters and editors and all these things. Like none of it's a complete illusion that we are these sort of pure vessels that from us we birth all this creativity. All we're doing is taking in information just like an LLM. We're just taking in information that's pre-existing in the world, and we recombine it, put our own spin and personal view on it. And I don't care if the way I did that was throwing that into VO3 and say, make a video of me dancing the Roomba, right? Like, and it does it. I created that. Like, I prompted it. I didn't do all of the line work and the rendering and the light mapping and the texture modeling. No, that wasn't me, but it doesn't matter. It was non-existent before I showed up, Yeah. And I feel like this is, I feel like a lot of this, it might be maybe for everyone. It doesn't, you were saying this a moment ago about how, where does all this meet up with herpetoculture? So all of this is somewhat abstract and philosophical. What are some concrete ways that this is getting into the work you do? If it is already, I don't know if this is already getting into your work, but or what ways do you see coming down the pike if it's not already?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think I will just distill that down into I think there's basically three. I think your friend hit on kind of like the three main arguments.
Yeah.
One is like environmental impact, right? Like just straight up environmental impact. Kilowatts, basically, kilowatts. And then there's the existential argument, like what happens if this thing becomes something new that we haven't seen, right? And then the argument of like a values argument, basically, like does this devalue some things that we tend to value, like kind of the aesthetics argument to some extent. So I think just like going down from there and trying to apply that to herpetoculture. I mean, I think the environmental argument is the one that I hear the most, especially in herpetoculture, because herpetoculture, I mean, it's not necessarily tied to conservation, but anyone who's interested in herps, for the most part, like you're interested also in like where they live and them being in the wild and just animals in general.
Yeah.
And I think that like, it is a concern.
Yeah.
But again, you have to think about the comparison, right? I am concerned about energy use writ large. The question is how much of that is unique to AI and how much of that is being driven by AI. I think that's the question that people fail to realize. Like AI is going to use a lot of energy, sure. But how big is that compared to other things, right? So there's kind of two big impacts of AI. One is energy, one is water. And I hear a lot of people say like, well, it's just water, like you just put it back. But that's not really how it works. Like it's evaporative cooling. These computers make a lot of heat.
Yeah.
Semiconductors make a lot of heat. So you send water in and then it evaporates and that's where you get your cooling. So it is consumptive water in most cases.
Sure.
They are trying to move to zero net water data centers, but it's still a little ways off.
Sure.
So I think like those are two real potential impacts. But the whole information technology and computing sector is only like less than 2% of the global carbon emissions footprint. It's not very much. And that's everything. Like that's all IT and computing. So AI is just a tiny sliver of that. I think the concern, which is a legitimate concern, is like the trajectory, right? Like AI takes a lot of energy right now. Training a model takes a ton of energy. It is now the case, like here just recently, I think that it is flipped officially from the training energy input versus like the actual daily inferences.
Yeah.
I think that daily inferences now has outpassed the amount of training input.
Wow.
In the sense that we're using them enough that like the training amortized over all of those individual people prompting it.
Sure.
Have lost some. And a lot of that's because the nice thing about a lot of these AI models, the foundation models, is that they are tunable and trainable. So you actually don't need to like do it from scratch every time.
Right.
Over time, it will be less and less the case that you would need to do it from scratch.
Yeah.
You'll be able to just update weights in these big networks and refine them from where they are. So I think that is like going to probably attenuate. But regardless, probably AI right now is only, I feel like it's something like, what is it? It's some low percentage of all of kind of like data source usage, but it's going to be like half by 2030 and probably just keep increasing. Like we know that AI is going to keep increasing.
Yeah.
And that is something to be concerned about. But I think the other thing that I think people don't calibrate this on is there's a handful of things that make that, even if it did use all the energy, like even in worst case scenarios of how much energy does it use and how much water does it use, it's actually not as bad as what I think people think it's going to be. And I say that as someone who is, like all three of my degrees are in environmental fields, right? Like I'm not, I did conservation. I still, do work in conservation.
Right.
So one of those is that we're at the beginning of the industry and it's going to get better.
Yeah.
The industry itself is incentivized to be more efficient. Like it doesn't want models to spend a bunch of time and energy answering a question. It wants it to be more efficient. I think it will. Two, data travels much faster than energy, right? Like you can send data through a fiber optic because it's digital much faster and with much higher fidelity than you can trying to send energy through wires. Yeah. So you can basically chase even clean energy across the grid as you're trying to do inferences. Training is a different problem because you kind of have to have that all for the most part localized in like one spot. It's hard to like move that. But for inference, you can have inference in a data center anywhere closer to where you are. But like, let's say like in your case, it's during the day, it makes more sense to have, be doing like even answering my prompt from your neck of the woods because you have solar running. Right. And then the next day, like at night, you're better off from somewhere in the Great Lakes because there's like a hydro plant or something, right?
Sure.
It's going to be easier to chase that, and it's going to be more incentivized to chase that over time. So we actually could reduce like the total footprint. The other thing is that just AI itself will make things more efficient and be better at things. So like, if I think about the time that I would normally spend on a computer doing a project, research has shown that for like most people in like a computer type field where you're sitting in front of a computer, you can do things way faster. It's like 30 to 40% faster if you're using AI.
Yeah.
So if you take that, I think the problem is you realize that benefit, and then Jefferson's effect, you just end up doing twice as much, so you still have that impact.
Yeah.
It's worth thinking about, right? Like there is like also you're gaining some efficiency, so it actually takes less to do
Sure.
those things.
Sure.
On top of all that, I do think that there's some just like base level calibrations that people don't really think. So I did some just like really loose back of the envelope calculations, which I won't like hang my career on, but I think they're probably within orders of magnitude. And that is like, if you had to guess, I'll put this to you. If you had to guess, we've been on Zoom now for like an hour, right? Two of us on Zoom streaming. Yep. How many prompts of a general AI with training amortized over those prompts, so like full direct energy cost, how many prompts do you think equals a Zoom call with two people?
Oh God, I don't have anywhere near enough, and I have no idea. I don't have anywhere near enough information. Can I? So it could just be a wild guess.
Yeah, it could be a wild guess. Yeah, I mean.
So in other words, what is the like electrical?
Like if you sat down at Gemini or whatever, and you like typed in a prompt and you like answer a question.
Yep.
How many times could you do that before you reach the energy consumption of us sitting here talking over Zoom for an hour?
Let me venture a wild guess. I'm going to say somewhere in the millions.
No, it's not. You're overly optimistic.
Way too high. Okay, how about
and that's largely because what's that?
Tens of thousands?
No, it's probably lower. I mean, a lot of this. Okay. So I'm being pretty conservative of how many prompts you get over the lifetime of a model. Okay. So amortizing like the training cost, because training energy is high.
Okay.
But if you're pretty conservative on that and think that like we're going to have to train models fairly frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not going to get that much life out of a given model. It's probably on the order of about 1,000 prompts.
That's still a ton. Again, wild guess, and all of my assumptions were coming from a very optimistic perspective. So, obviously, going to be way off in a.
No, totally. I mean, but who knows? I mean, that's part of the problem, right? When people enter these conversations, if you can't even think about the comparison, which is, if you're someone on the internet, your computer's on all day.
Yeah.
What are the things you're doing? If ChatGPT is going to use some energy, but like I work remotely, I'm on Zoom all day.
The electrical grid load of OnlyFans compared to prompts is probably like not even comparable. It's so many more people on OnlyFans, man.
Yeah. So without getting into like the moral valence of OnlyFans or whatever, I do have the data for Netflix. So one 2-hour Netflix show is like 2,500 prompts.
Yeah.
One international flight is over 1 million prompts.
Ah, okay. All right.
So basically, I think that's where people kind of lose track of things. It is a big environmental impact. However, as someone who is interested in environment and conservation and energy consumption, it is not the thing that I'm necessarily most concerned about.
Yeah, bigger fish.
Even when you look at the trajectory, it's not going to get anywhere near the aviation industry.
Yeah.
Almost ever. You look at water. The water is a problem. It's definitely a localized problem because water isn't like energy. It doesn't transport very well. Yeah. So if you are locating a data center in some place that already has a paucity of water, that's going to cause problems.
Yeah.
So I don't want to discount local folks' concerns. I think that is
of course.
Concern people should be concerned about. But just kind of globally over the grid, or over our whole water system, agriculture is still 70% of all water usage.
Yeah.
And it's AI data centers will never get there. And we have efficiencies that we'll gain along the way, so it'll reduce it.
Yeah.
On top of that, if you could imagine having some AI that did some smart sensing and smart irrigation.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Probably reduce all of ag by a huge amount too. And so I think that is this is why it's hard to really say if anyone's right or wrong, because who knows? Those are all unrealized potential.
Yeah.
But I think it's a pretty what do I want to say? It's a realistic potential that people often just discount when they're having these conversations.
Man, so I love that you said that, because I think if you pay attention to this trend on a like on a broadcast level, in the sense that maybe you watch the occasional hard fork podcast. Maybe you pay attention every once in a while to like the latest release from GPT and OpenAI and what their release videos are. Maybe you're like paying a little bit of attention. The thing that you tend to hear a lot is from sort of the doomer side of it is like, oh, well, all of these AI hopefuls just they always fall back on, well, the AI will solve the problem for us. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, like that's a fair criticism, but also it's gonna help a lot, like even if we're the ones doing the problem solving, there's gonna be so much that there's the thing I think about it is because the reason it sounds lofty is for the same reasons that when Jeff Bezos says he wants to take waste production off planet, sounds lofty and crazy, but it's like, oh yeah, but like that's a great idea. Like, of course, like, yeah, like why wouldn't we just put all of our energy production on Venus? Like, yeah, just do it there, and then we can bring it back here, and we'll just make the biosphere as rich and productive as possible. Let's go. Yeah. It's a good idea. Just because it's fantastical and like seems out of reach for a ding dong like me doesn't mean there's not like a viability there. Doesn't mean there's not something with real value. And I feel that's the same thing about the AI stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm not just going to be hopeful and be completely cavalier about everything I do with it just because I'm assuming it's going to solve all our problems. But like, my goodness, if you can get one that's good at helping you through, do some marriage counseling or something, you can get one that's like helping you with understanding how do we water our crops in a way that cuts 30% of our water use. Like, of course, that's totally reasonable, Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are a bunch of problems that are in that near zone. Like, I think that, like the Bezos example, like it is in the realm of future possibilities, but I would even put that further out in that, like, there are a lot of steps to solve before you can get there.
Oh yeah,
but
for
there
sure.
are a million problems that we know how to do them in theory, like this, like crop sensing and smart irrigation.
Yeah.
But we just don't have the infrastructure or like just to do them without something like AI or like even dumber kind of large scale machine learning. You just couldn't do them. Even if you knew how to do them, you just couldn't do them at scale.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or they're just not cheap enough. But I think that's like AI will make a lot of those things cheaper and people will have incentive to do them once it's cheap enough. And those are near-term things where it's not even getting into like long-term forecasting. Right?
Yeah.
So here's one other good example. This isn't exactly right, but I do think I want to mention it as like a really good concrete example. So I have a good friend, Luke Samford, who teaches economics here at Yale School of the Environment. So what his lab does is they're looking at carbon markets, right? So if you want to develop something, you can buy carbon credits to be able to get like offset, right?
Yeah.
That is a kind of hard thing to do because how do you buy a carbon credit? Like, what is a carbon credit?
Yeah.
It's, this is not my area of expertise, but it is largely, you protect like an acre of forest and then you can use carbon in some other way because you're sequestering carbon in that acre of forest, right? That different forests are different values, like that we can kind of solve with just kind of our knowledge of science. Mm-hmm. But the problem that is hard to solve is you also kind of have to layer in the probability that forest would have been logged or wouldn't have been on its own, right? Like if you pick someplace in the middle of the Amazon that no one can get to, like, do you really get, like, if you say, like, oh, I promise not to log that, is that really as much of a value as like a parcel right next to the road?
Right.
But what his research is using computer vision models with Landsat data and economics data and lots of things, layering them in so that he can essentially simulate a counterfactual. So he's basically generating generative AI, generating a future world where this isn't, where you don't sequester it versus you do sequester it.
Yeah.
And then looking at the delta between those to say that's how much carbon you should be crediting this person.
Yeah.
And that is a meaningful environmental impact tool.
Yeah.
That could potentially solve a lot of habitat in places where a lot of the animals that we care about, I mean, maybe not your mastics, because not a lot of trees there, but where a lot of us, really care about. And I'm sure there are a lot in, I don't know. Actually, one of my PhD cohort, her name is Yara Al-Shwerik. She is a Saudi researcher. She's like the world's only Saudi Arctic researcher. Yeah. But her research is like thermal physiology of uromastics and thermal physiology of wood frogs. So she's
Is it really?
Yeah. Another cool person you should talk to.
Please get me in touch with her.
a long tangent just to say that basically, like, there are so many benefits that I think people are discounting.
Yeah.
I think that they're kind of extrapolating the downsides in a lot of cases. And I don't want to diminish the fact that it is a new industry that is going to have some carbon costs and some
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that you can't just wholesale write it off without also kind of at least accounting for the other side of the balance sheet.
Yeah.
And also just like in general, like calibrating it. Like you cannot tell me not to use ChatGPT if you're going to like binge all of Game of Thrones in one night, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you're like on your phone flipping on Facebook, like just the amount of carbon, you just have to calibrate it, essentially.
Yeah. This is really quite, I love this. And I want to keep going, but I'd like to try to bring it into maybe getting a more direct in touching ground directly with herpetoculture. So
sorry.
No. I don't mean it like I trust. No, I really don't mean it as a criticism at all. I feel like what we've done so far is laid out a good primer where maybe if someone's listening to the show and maybe they haven't thought about the ways that AI could relate to herpetoculture, maybe now they have a lot of maybe some background information and context for what could really be possible, right? And so now what I'd like to do is I've talked a little bit about how I might use an LLM for like GPT to, as I mentioned before, help me get to a better understanding of what plant might equate most closely relate to a wild allegory or a wild counterpart, chemically speaking. But then what I'd love to do is just kind of fire off a few of the ways that I've gotten very fantastical about this. And then maybe you could say, well, here's why that's nonsense. Or also think about this too. Are you cool with that?
Let's do it. Yeah. I mean, we can go back and forth too, because I think that people would love to hear like practical. People always want to hear like, well, what is the thing that I can do right now?
Yeah.
I don't care about the theory. So maybe we can just go back and forth. Like I think that's an interesting area that I haven't really, like every time I talk to someone, they're using it in a way that I'm like, wow, that is.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Okay. So I mentioned the plants. That's been the big one. But I've also been using GPT to help me like find resources and thinkers that are talking about the same sorts of issues that I like to talk about in herpetoculture, but in somewhat adjacent worlds. So it's led me to, what this amounts to is like a fancy way of saying book recommendation. But what's really great about it is I love being able to say, like recently, I had a friend, and actually a previous podcast guest of ours who reached out to say, hey, I listened to this episode you did. Have you done any, are you like been educated in like systems thinking and whatever? And I'm like, no, I have no idea. It's just sort of an intuition. And he's like, well, you should check out these few books, And so what I did is I went into GPT and I said, okay, give me the sort of like the gross summary of what this book is intending to deliver to people. And then not to substitute for it by any stretch of the imagination, but like it acts as a conversation companion where I can then say, okay, that's an interesting concept, but I don't understand how that crosses over into herpetoculture. Or like, can you give me an example of a way that this might cross into stuff I've thought about and spoken about with you before? And it will fire back. It's like, well, okay, you're making a logical fallacy here. You think that this is saying X, but what it's actually saying is Y. And let me explain to you why that's the case. So it on top of being sort of like an external cognitive scaffold where I can externalize a thought into one thread and then immediately go back to the thread I was reading before and not lose that previous thing, it acts as like a conversation partner when it might be difficult to get a person to have a conversation with me about the same thing, because either A, they don't want to go into that much detail, B, they don't have the time, maybe they're not a good communicator and they can't convey what they're trying to say to me. Maybe they don't know enough about what I'm trying to, they don't know enough about herpetoculture to say, well, maybe it'll apply in this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's a handful like the. Maybe I'll try and distill that. I'll repeat back and maybe like a handful of like practical kind of archetypes that people could maybe use. One of those I think that is really useful is using it as a perspective shift or perspective check. So like we have thoughts swimming around our head every day. Even when we talk to people, we tend to talk to people who think about us, same social class.
Yeah.
Like the nice thing about an AI, it's imperfect because again, it like wasn't trained for all social classes. But you can say like, I want you to take this perspective.
Yeah.
Or like, here's my. I want you to be to like disagree with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Like most faithful way can you disagree with me, and that is, profoundly useful in a lot of ways. Another way that you can use it is to say like, here's my intuition. How does that match up to what is real in the world? That is a really useful way to use it, right? So a couple of prompt ways that you can do that is you can set up to say like, I'm gonna have like a board meeting and here are like my boards, like one of my I don't know if I should say like someone who works in my organization has one where he's like a board and his people that he has set up are like who is Lao? Is it Lao Tzu? No, Sun Tzu. Who wrote The Art of War?
Sun Tzu.
Sun Tzu, yeah. Sun Tzu, Oprah, Barack Obama, Steve Jobs. It's like all these like great thinkers, but they all think in different ways. And if you can train a bot to like have like 4 different threads of thinking and then synthesize them, like that's actually kind of useful. Like you can try and get yourself there, but it's going to be way better. Yeah. The other is just like an executive function bot, kind of. Yep. Like to say, I want to be able to think about this. I want to think about it clearly. Can you just scaffold my thinking? Yep. Or like I have a bunch of things that I need to do, and I just can't put the time and energy into the administrative thinking. Yeah. So like for an example, for me in like herpetoculture, it's like I have a bunch of tadpoles, all different age cohorts, different species, and I just want to say like, all right, can you just make me a tadpole feeding regime? Like here's what I normally I normally feed. Like I know I could go in a spreadsheet and I know I could do this, but you can do it in like 30 seconds and it would take me a bunch of time formatting and I still wouldn't be happy. That I think is really useful. Like give me a schedule for feeding or like here are I just want you to keep a running list of all my T5 UV bulbs and like let me know, like give me a calendar for when I need to replace them or when I need to check them. Or like here's my UV output that I'm checking. Can you like give me a, come up with a dashboard that tells like all those little just executive function things that you could do, but it's just saving you time to make so you can actually spend time like looking at your animals and learning natural history. It's so practical. My goodness. Yeah. So practical. Yeah. Yes. That's a great example. I think another one that actually I'm just realizing is, so I hate like, I experiment with lots of different lights. I hate like when they have other things in there. So I'm often like splicing things out of lights and like splicing lights together and things. And some of them are like 3 wires if you have like multiple different color lights and things like that. Some of them are like timers, and it's all like kind of confusing. And so a lot of times I can just interact with it and say, I will never trust it. Like I always want to verify it, but it gets me 90% of the way in like 10% of the time it would have taken me. And then I can do just that little bit of like actually being sure I'm not going to burn my house down, my own understanding of electronics and like being able to like synthesize information better. Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's a phenomenal. I love that. There's so much practicality there. There's even some stuff that you mentioned that I'd never considered even trying. I never thought about asking GPT like, hey, if you were going to make a feeding regime for 200 Uromastyx, what would it look like? I mean, it would just be interesting to see. I might not agree with it, but you know what I mean? It would still be really interesting. That's so cool. Or if you were like, hey, I know that my crickets only last this long, doobie only lasts this long. Like how do I optimize a feeding regime based on like the output, or like how many colony, like if I know, like there's going to be some level where you have to do some empiricism on the outside. Oh yeah. It often doesn't have a lot of that information, right? Like it'll try and give you an answer, but it sometimes won't. They are, depending on what model you use, they're getting better at like expressing uncertainty or like taking into account uncertainty. But if you do a little bit of empiricism, like if you knew, like how many males and females you have in your dubia colony and like look at what you get out every, handful of weeks, if you could put that information in there, how many, like a growth trajectory, I'm sure some of those published growth trajectory allometry of a Uromastyx for like, if you know the protein, I bet it's in the literature. I bet it's in the academic literature. I would hope so, but I don't know. Or you could use any like an agama. You could use something that's similar body mass. And you're like, I just think like you could actually probably have it say like, how many males and female dimios do I need given what I told you about my colony and the number of animals I have and their age, and project that out over time, given what you know about my like keeping regime, my growth rates of my animals, like all sorts of things. Or if you like sell 50 of them and you're like, I want to downsize, or I know I have this thing coming up, like what do I need to do to get there? You could do all of that, but you never will, because like that is super boring.
Dude, so boring. And you know what the other one is good that this is great for is you doing your like shopping and consumption. So like, for example, I looking for enclosures or something, I was recently looking around and thinking about like a side project that I want to get going on, and I'd have to get a couple of enclosures. And so what I did is I had GPT, I said, hey, what is the broad consensus from all the reviews that you can find anywhere in the world on this brand of cage? And, and you can get a really, it's like, it'll give you a really, really interesting layout. It's like, well, most people love this enclosure, but the people who don't like it for this reason. Or it'll say, there's actually a substantial number of negative reviews for this particular cage manufacturer, but the reviews are not negative about the cage themselves. Maybe it's about the lead time or the wait time, or the shipping wasn't very nice. Maybe the customer service wasn't very good. So you can comb through reviews and get a really good idea of what you may or may not be buying just by asking it a question like that. That stuff is I love that kind of thing. That kind of just like, I can do that today. That's really nice.
I think we would call that like bulk synthesis, right? Like
bulk synthesis.
You could read all these things, but you don't want to, and it will be able to do it better because it doesn't sleep and faster, right?
Yeah.
But I do think there's also another class that is like not just synthesizing things that you could synthesize, but actually interpreting things that you wouldn't normally. And for herpetoculture specifically, I think that there is tons of academic literature out there, and academics write in the most arcane and awful way possible, and like you wouldn't even know what you were looking for. Like for me, I just guarantee you that someone has like a growth trajectory of uromastic somewhere. But if you might not know that is like, like I don't even know what you would call it, like allometry or whatever. Like you might not just know the terms or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Or for uromastics, it's written in a language that you don't understand. So like during my PhD, I had a project where I needed to make frogs glow to be able to track them. And so like I had them uptake it. The way you do it in tadpoles is you dose them osmotically, and then tadpoles resorb their tails, and that's where they keep all their calcium in these lime sacs along their tail. So if you dose them, they'll just resorb that into their bones, and then their bones glow for the rest of their lives. Cool. There was a paper on this lime sac stuff, but it was written in Italian from like 50 years ago.
Whoa!
So I could find someone who could like take this, translate it for me, so that I could use that paper. LLMs have no problem translating. Like for me, it was from Italian to English, but for the layperson, it can just be read all the reams of academic research on this stuff and just give me a folk summary.
Wow.
That I can understand, right?
Yeah.
That like AI will open the doors. LLM specifically will open the doors to lay herpetoculturists, lay researchers.
Yeah.
Far more. It will also make research better, I think, over time. Like right now, published research is pretty hit or miss to some extent. Like it's good overall, but we don't publish a lot of stuff that we probably should because it's like a null result, or it doesn't really tell the story very well. I think when it's not about, right now the currency of publishing is getting citations, so it's like getting eyes and attention. Yeah. When that attention ceases to be human attention, which is limited to now humans are interacting through an AI that has unlimited attention, and so it's now the currency is actually like how useful is this bit of information. I think we're going to get a lot more better information out there. And so it'll actually increase like just our rate of knowledge of what we do know about herps in general.
Absolutely. Oh, this is awesome. So all of the ways that I have gotten, let's say, more fantastical in my imagination about the things that could come from all of this, almost all of the other situations involve peripheral technology. So, for example, one that I've written a lot about, bullshit. I've written a couple of things about and thought about a lot is the way that advancements in both AI and gene editing technology might change the nature of the Endangered Species Act and smuggling, right? So the way I've put it in the past has been something to the effect of, what does it mean to have an ESA that protects a Fiji iguana when I can just download whatever the pre-existing genome was for Fiji iguanas when we took them all and got a little sample, and all of a sudden we've got all of them, and we've got all their genetic history, and we're ready to rip. We can always make another one. We can always do a new one. We can always reseed the islands. We can always do this stuff. Are we going to care anymore about whether or not some of them venture into private collections? I mean, is that going to be anything that anybody cares about? What is smuggling going to look like when I'm not looking for lizards in a suitcase wrapped in film canisters, but I'm looking for flash drives with genetic information, right? I mean, it just seems like, and again, that assumes that gene editing technology is not only going to be sufficiently powerful to do that, but also that it's democratized in such a way that somebody has access to it, right? So there's a lot of things that have to happen before that. But I'm just curious how you'd respond to something like that, something that's more on the fantasy side of things, right?
Yeah, I think the distance between that happening and here, there is so much space in between. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
I will say, like, as someone who does genomics, I actually have a friend who works at Causal, which is, they're the ones trying to do like direwolf and stuff.
Yes.
I don't know that we're definitely not at Jurassic Park yet, right?
Sure, no.
Like, we're not there.
Yeah.
I think the idea of, it's not an old idea, it actually precedes AI. The idea that something like a genome is biological information that should be treated in the same way as like an actual specimen.
Okay.
And so, like, there are countries like Brazil, maybe Ecuador, like, information is also treated in the same way as exporting an animal already.
Really?
So, like, technically exporting a genome, even technically exporting like knowledge of a fishing spot where a species lives, that's technically local knowledge that, like, in theory, you can't export.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know so, like, to be honest, I've done a lot of moving, like, both tissue and specimens around.
Yeah.
Mostly internationally with Canada, but I work with someone at the Yale Peabody Museum who does all that, who's a savant. So most of what I know is like secondhand from him. So I don't know if it's totally true. But he does lots of permitting, and that is my understanding from him. So that already happens. I think that the gene editing, I don't know how close we're going to get there. Like, the actual mechanism for gene editing CRISPR is pretty exact compared to what we used to do, which is like irradiate things or just like physically shot, like blast gene snippets into germline cells. But it's still pretty imprecise. Mm-hmm. We still don't really know how genomes work. Mm-hmm. Our understanding of genomes is still mostly linear, and genomes interact three-dimensionally.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're not at a point where we can, genomically, I can say we're not there.
No,
like,
for sure.
There, and our understanding isn't anywhere near there. Maybe it will be in the future. Yeah. But I think by the time we get there, like, we're going to have we're going to be having different conversations around it. Things will have evolved. Sure. The ecosystem of this conversation will evolve a lot.
Definitely.
A couple ways that I do think it'll impact things like, especially smuggling, is AI and genomics will make it much, much faster to be able to genetically fingerprint things. And so, like, it would be pretty trivial, I think, at some point to, right now there's a lot of species that you have to microchip, for instance. Mm-hmm. It would be pretty trivial to get to a point where we just genomically fingerprint all animals. Mm-hmm. And so you would know if they're smuggled or not. Mm-hmm. And you could know if they were from a line that was smuggled or wasn't smuggled. Mm-hmm. That's technology that is, like, you could do without AI, mm-hmm. but it would be pretty cost prohibitive, and most people wouldn't be able to do it. Whereas AI, I think, will help make that much more feasible as something that you can just, like, do as you go through TSA check. Mm-hmm. You know? That is, like, that's still kind of far off, but I think that's probably more near term. Then I think we'll be doing that a lot more.
Okay, interesting.
And then I do think that some other, like, really practical examples, this is maybe more on the research side, but doing range maps. Our range maps are pretty bad. Like, we are inferring a lot from them, but they're still kind of hit or miss. I think much more high-powered, like, machine learning, AI, computer vision type information will make it much easier to say, like, we think that the species is going to be here. Or
Yeah.
And that'll be really useful for protection. Also probably useful for smuggling also. Knowing where smuggling is going to occur, where it isn't going to occur. I think also for aviation, I mean, this gets into like some other ethical dilemmas, but knowing what flight is most likely to have a specific species being smuggled, what is the probability of something being smuggled, that is going to be, that is like a solid AI probability problem.
Yeah. So I love that. This is like
the problem, like even like sorry, but one example I was just thinking about was, you know, even if you come through, like how many of those TSA people know what is what in a box, right? Like they will never know two things that look, two conspecifics that look very similar.
Sure.
But an AI, even if you don't, even without genomic fingerprinting, just things like iNaturalist and Seek, their computer vision models, like just the TSA being able to use that.
Yeah,
that is a kind of a game changer if you think about it. Like the average person now can identify, at least down to genera, almost any species on the planet. That is wild.
Sure. Yeah, no. I mean, I love that's an interesting slant on it. I had not thought about the ways that it, you know, would tamp down or make security and sort of regulatory regimes more powerful in that regard. I hadn't anticipated that side of it. That's super interesting. I mean, so much of my brainstorming around that just comes from the again, sort of optimistic, liberal-minded side of things. Like, man, just the amount of things that could free up it, because not just gene editing technology, but like the ability to, like, you know, if we can print a heart, it's like you could just print a Fiji iguana. You know what I mean? So like in my head, I'm like, well, herpetoculture will just implode because because it's like if you have if that's in the realm of access to anyone, which, you know, presumably at some point, given enough optimization and enough time, like, sure, it's not completely unfeasible, right? So does that look like the kind of thing where all of a sudden I can just make a cross between a chuckwalla and a ball python and just, you know, so just run it enough times to where it works somehow, and I make this weird chimera being that is like, why did you even do this? But I have it, and, you know, I mean, I don't know. It just seems like it could throw the ability to access those sorts of things, the ability to manipulate and adjust. Even you don't even have to take it that far of like printing some funky hybrid, right? You could even just take it as far as like, well, I know enough because of the research I've done with my particular AI that happens to be trained on herpetofauna. Well, I know that if I over 5 generations manipulate the X factor in their environments, I'm going to get Y output. And it's sufficiently different and strange and unique enough to where it's going to net me some money, or maybe it's going to set me apart. This is a new way of making a morph. It's not just a gene that I accidentally hatched from a group of animals. It's something I intentionally used physiology, chemistry, and biology to manipulate and generate a thing that no one else had thought of before. I mean, it doesn't get that. You don't have to take that many steps to see how you could have a really profound impact on the stuff that we keep, I think. You know?
Yeah, I think that what you're hitting at, though, is a kind of a intrinsic limit of AI, in that there are kind of two just like knowledge limits of AI. One is access to knowledge. So if it can't access a paper that says the thing, then obviously it doesn't know it, so it can't put it back. The other is just an epistemic limit, in that we just don't know. The world doesn't know.
Sure.
So imagine that you found like a new species, and you wanted to know what, you wanted to know something about it. Maybe you can kind of infer from other species. You can maybe infer from the habitat.
Right.
But you wouldn't really know for that species. So imagine like an alien species. You wouldn't know any of that. You would have to develop that knowledge empirically.
Yeah.
To be able to then know it. And then from there on, you do kind of know the thing.
Sure.
But for instance, if you have like, so genes is kind of a hard one because that's pretty mechanistic. Like it's Mendelian. So for most things, you can know pretty clearly what's going to happen, but within like a pretty strict probability range. But let's imagine something that's like very pleiotropic, or something that's like many, many genes. Knowing how to mix those, you just might not know, right? Down the line. I'm trying to think of another good like epistemic. I just think that some of those you're getting into epistemic limits of the AI will just never know because we don't really know. Like it'll be able to make it better, maybe help you make better inference. based on correlation of things that we do know, but it will always be stuck in a realm of it won't know until it gets the information.
Well, again, so and again, please tell me where I love hearing this. I want to know where I'm not understanding something, right? But I think some of my assumption, a lot of this is, again, fantastical. So if I'm envisioning a world in which it's not just some LLM that I'm consulting with, right? I'm consulting with some form of tech, some mix of software and hardware that can actually run experiments in the real world and gain new knowledge, right? So, I mean, again, this might take us back to the philosophical side of AI and the whole argument, well, it doesn't create new knowledge yet and all that, that's fine. But I'm just like imagining, again, all of this is super creative. It's just pure fantasy, right? But I'm imagining that in a world in which I have some piece of tech that I can ask to run the experiment enough times, like I can't splice a chuckwalla and a ball python together enough times in a lifetime to make it work, but maybe this piece of tech can do it, just running the experiment enough times to where it figures it out. Oh, well, when you match things up in this way, now you have a chuck python something, right? I don't know. And I know, again, very far-fetched. It's not meant to be something we can do tomorrow. But I just feel like, doesn't that make a difference when the machine that we're talking about can actually run an experiment in the real world?
Yeah, I think that is true, but the real world also has physical limits.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's say like let's put it very concrete in herpetoculture.
Yeah.
You have a species that has an ontogenetic color change,
right,
and you don't see it until year 2.
Yeah.
You can run that experiment all you want. You're not going to know the answer until 2 years. And then,
unless I find a way to speed up that process, right? I mean, don't we jack up chickens with antibiotics to make them grow 10 times faster than they normally would so we can eat them?
How do you know then that whatever you've done to increase that growth rate didn't also change the expression of those ontogenetic color?
Right.
I think that's that is an epistemic limit of
that's right.
Limit, and there's going to be a million of those things. That's why people I think are often concerned about scientists losing their jobs with AI. They're not going to lose it.
No way. We need more.
The thing we need is actually more data. Actually, and this is another concrete thing I think I do want to bring back to the herp community too.
Yeah, please.
We are all running mini ecosystems all the time, and we have tons of data that we're just not collecting.
Yeah.
Right? Like natural history information, breeding regimes, care, all those things. And some of that is because we just don't collect them. Like in my PhD, every tadpole I weighed every couple of weeks so I could get like body mass and doing all sorts of stuff. We're not doing that at home.
No.
But there's a lot of information that we are generating.
Yeah.
And if we put that all together, we would actually have a lot of information about species that we're keeping.
Yeah.
Right now, all we get is, we kind of do that. We crowdsource it a little bit with forums and with online communities. But you could do that in a much more rigorous and formal way if you have a way. Kind of, like what I envision, maybe a more near term but pioneering idea is we actually just have all of the variants. I do mostly dart frog and like arboreal lizard world. So imagine we had all our variants with our light and temperature and our hygrometers, like everything that we're tracking. Mm-hmm. And then we just have information about like our organisms, how long do they live, how often do they lay, all those sorts of things. If you aggregated that, even just over a year of all the people keeping them, like we would have dendrobatid nailed. Yeah, we would know everything. We would know like probably like what you need to tune, like almost exactly if you have this problem or if you want to induce breeding. Like here's the exact recipe for the most part.
There's all this hidden info that's just passing through the sieve. There's just all this data, we're not collecting it all. It's just evaporating, right?
And we shouldn't. Like that's the thing with the AI, why AI makes this even relevant. If you put all that information out there now, like on the forums, it would just be useless. Yeah. Because a single observation doesn't really do you that much. Or, these time series of temperatures, that doesn't do you much unless you can analyze it all. Yeah, AI allows you to analyze at large scales and then synthesize down into whatever is relevant to your question. Yeah. And that is also the other thing that I think AI is going to make. This is a side point too, but just for research right now, you have to tell the main story because you're looking for human attention, but there's all kinds of other information. Like we were talking earlier about how we tend to think about the means, but not the variance of things. Yeah. Every paper that talks about like the average thermal response of an organism is also telling you a lot of information about the variance in thermal response.
Right.
But to be able to synthesize all that information now would be almost impossible.
Yeah.
Because you don't even know what papers to look for.
Right.
Necessarily.
Right.
But if you have all of those papers in your corpus that your AI is being able to synthesize, then you now have access to all that information. So it's not just synthesizing what's there, it's also uncovering troves of things that we already have reported.
Right.
That we're not making use of yet.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. It's like without all of that information, it's almost like herpetoculture is sort of an extreme form of like island isolation, right? It's like all these little pockets. It's basically islands, right? I have an island here that has uromastyx. Friend of mine, has uromastyx in Pennsylvania. It's a totally different island with different inputs and different, just different. Everything's different, right? So there's gonna be a lot of crossover. But some of those differences and the impacts of those differences would be elucidated by greater data collection and sharing, and then being able to aggregate that and view that. Maybe not right now with puny human brain, but with big AI brain, all of a sudden, all that data starts to get clearer and starts to tell us a more interesting picture about what's happening.
Yeah, and in the science world, we call this microcosms. And we spend tons of money and get grants to build little microcosms because we want to control as much environmental variation as we can.
Yeah.
This is the other thing about machine learning and AI that I think people don't really understand is that one of the ways that I use machine learning for causal inference all the time is that in an experimental setting, like a crop field, right, you can only control so many things. And then you have to have replicates to know what you're actually seeing. You're controlling variation, right?
Yeah.
And that's why in microcosms, when we do different experiments, we're trying to isolate as much as possible and only change one thing so we know what the effect of that one thing is.
Right.
With machine learning, you're not limited to just those like individual parameters and trying to control them. You can actually just throw in all the variation and give it enough data.
Yeah.
You have mapped out almost all the variation that there is.
Right.
And so if you mapped out essentially all the microcosms, experimental microcosms that we're running every day with just natural variation and how you keep your animal, you could learn a ton from if you aggregate.
So much. Yes.
So
much information.
Right now, like we're not running experiments. We're not really part of like the scientific enterprise as individual keepers. Yeah. Because we don't have replication, but we could be part of a massive replication.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. I love that. Can I? This is peripherally related, but you mind if I give you an anecdote that I feel like lines up here? That need to have not just sufficient sample size, but controls to be able to understand what you're doing at all is something I try to harp on a lot with just friends of mine and people that I talk to inside of herpetoculture, because I feel like it doesn't always come up, And the way that this was personified recently was there's a very well-known herpetocultural influencer, and he made a video and he described uromastyx as the most overrated lizard imaginable. And he told the story of getting his, and he said, it was my dream for a while, and then I got like a few. He got like 2 or 3. And this is all they did, and nothing happened, and they were boring, and all of that. Okay, well, let's just pause there for just a moment. You had 3? Like, you had 3. Like, imagine meeting just 3 Chinese people and being like, Chinese people are X. You crazy? Like, it's, like, first of all, you'd never do that, right? Because it's just a foolish way to go through the world. But additionally, you spoke about uromastyx broadly. That's a genre. You had a species of uromastyx. You had J-Rai. That's one kind. You had 3 members of one kind of an entire genre. Your for at least a decade of working with those animals, your first reaction should be, what do I have wrong in my care, my systems, my assumptions, my expectations, and my point of view on these animals? That should be your first, what am I doing wrong? Not, these are overrated. That is just, it's a completely naive perspective. And I just feel like I don't even feel comfortable making generalizations about uromastyx, and I've had thousands over the years, and it just doesn't feel sufficient at all. because I recognize that I have a microcosm. It's a microcosm. What I'm doing here is not the same as Israel. It's not the same. Some of them come from Israel. I'm not there. I don't know, I don't remember. It was just an anecdote I wanted to share because, boy, oh boy, that one got to me. I think that was the point of the video, was to get to somebody like me and be like, yeah, I'm fired up,
Yeah.
But anyway,
rage bait for the Euromastics keepers.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, you just
I
called out my entire profession.
Yeah, that's just humans are not good at folk statistics in general.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
we're just not good at it.
Right.
And for something like that, every time that you add a variable that could impact the thing that you're trying to make the inference about, the observation you're trying to make the inference about, then you have to have more replicates.
Yeah.
To be able to kind of control or analytically control for that thing. And with an organism, there are a million things that that are impacting it, and so you can't control those with like a replicate study. But you could, given enough of them, enough data, you swamp out that variation. That's like where machine learning can come in.
Right.
And actually, as you were talking about that, I was just thinking about, in my research, there were a million things that I did that I'm realizing herpetoculturists just do recreationally. So like I had whole experiments where I filmed wood frog metamorphs as they like traversed an area, right? Yeah. Because I was interested in kind of their behavior and some of their physiology in relation to some of the things I was interested in.
Yeah.
I don't have any cameras, but I know a lot of people just have cameras on their like, so imagine a world where everyone just takes their Euromastics. Yeah. You're recording them. And at the same time that you have this kind of recording of their etiology or their behavior, you're also recording like parameters in the environment, right?
Yeah. Right.
You could actually pretty quickly make some pretty good, robust observations about like thermal preference and thermal performance in relation to behavior. The kind of thing that like it would take me a year or two and a huge experimental setup to do on my own. And it's something that people are spending tons of money and time to do on their own. Yes. Whereas if you could just tap into this information, it is there. The other one that came to mind is there's a organization called the Earth Species Project. Mm-hmm. This is maybe less relevant to reptiles, some to amphibians, but they're trying to map on like animal language. Right. So you take machine learning and you see a behavioral response, or you see like something in their environment or some action, and then you record the call, and you can eventually start to kind of piece together like, what did that call mean? Can you translate that? For herps, instead of maybe a sonogram, it's just a behavior, like a map of where they're going in the environment. But you could start to map on, like translate behavior to the environment pretty quickly and easily. All with machine learning and AI and large language models, that same architecture of just being kind of like it's transcribing really complex stuff into the abstract. Yeah. You can do that for anything. Animal behavior, animal sounds, environment, whatever. Mm-hmm. And start to condense that down in a way that gives us really useful information. It's just stuff that's not tapped into as herpetoculture.
Yeah, there's all this unmined data that just would reveal so much that it's just, again, it's all just evaporating into the ether. It's like paying rent. It's like it's just going nowhere, But I love this so much because it is. So part of why I think AI is going to be so valuable for herpetoculturists in particular is because I think what we're doing, I think the broad reason of what we're doing and why we're doing it is it's related to domestication, but it's I kind of have this working idea that, well, as people become more and more isolated from the natural world in which we evolved, we have this unsated craving for other beings. And so when we can't have them as a part of our daily lives, we bring them inside and we bring them into our homes because we were supposed to be around them. And we're learning about these other kinds of beings. It's a way of exercising your empathy. It's a sort of cognitive time travel on some level, and I think that what you were just describing is an example of how one could lean into some kind of model or AI that can help you exercise your empathy and grow your ability to understand what those animals are doing. I mean, it's so. Yeah, maybe most reptiles aren't all that vocal as far as we know, but they have a very rich body language. Like as you know, very, very rich body language. And it's hard to, it's why so much of the way I talk about things now, I hate to say it this way sometimes, but so much of it's intuitive. It's all feeling. I mean, it's like at some point, I'm sure you have this with the wood frogs to some extent. You could pick up on something a wood frog is doing or getting ready to do or might be experiencing internally 10 times faster than somebody who's never seen one, right? Because you spent so much time around them. But so much of it is like almost a creative process. It's almost an artistic process. You're going on intuition and things you've developed and things you've felt. There's a guy I've mentioned many times on the show. His name's Paul Shepard. I can't remember what his exact title is. An anthropologist of some variety. But forgive me if I'm messing that up. If it's actually he just writes about anthropology, but he's not. I don't know. But he has this whole idea that a person, a human being, cannot become a fully developed human being without other creatures in their life. Like so much of your development is focused around using animals as reference points and counterpoints as you grow. This is why so many children's books and children's shows, it's all animals. They're not little human beings. They're like little animals. They're Muppets. They're elephants. There's Bluey. There's, Peppa Pig. It's like, it's a pig. It's a pig, but it's a person, and this is like this deep expression of like the way we're supposed to understand living things is like, that's another thing. It may not be another person, but it's like another thing that's just as rich and developed as we are, that has so much going on under the surface. And you can do that. You can start to unpack that by just raw, unadulterated, invested time. But you could probably expedite that process if you had, sort of like the AI equivalent of undo, right? And in Photoshop, you have undo, and it's going to make you a terrible draftsman. It's like, probably not. Like I'm just going to get through way more iterations than you. So you might be able to get through more iterations if you're leaning on some AI agent to help you interpret your organisms.
Yeah, 100%.
Man. Well, hey, listen. We're like at 2 hours.
Yeah, it's been a long.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that your schedule is more loaded than mine. Sounds like you have more kids than I do, and your job is more involved than mine is at the moment. So I want to be respectful of your time. I want to ask you one closer question, but before I do, I also want to say that this has been awesome, and I'd love to do another one at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're up for it. Okay.
Maybe we could take like questions or something so that we're not so unconstrained. I think we probably need some.
No, I think that's a great idea.
Conversation.
Yeah, no. I'll do that for next time. I'll put out like a call for questions from the various audience members that I have.
I know that someone's got to be livid about something that we didn't touch on here.
I'm sure. Oh yeah. Yeah, but we can only cover so much, and I don't like to. I like to see where the conversation goes because I think it leads to really interesting places, and I think this is no exception to that. So then my final question for you, at least until next time, is it's the one I ask everyone at the end of the show, which is why herpetoculture? Like, why this? And that can be, you can take that very broadly. You can take it very specifically. Like, why do you do it? Why do we do it as human beings? We've had answers, everything from Phil Tremper's storied answer, which is it's a disease, to everything from that to the Paul Shepard thing. Like, we need them to develop as a human being. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think my answer would be I like thinking about the environment and ecology and organisms interacting in the environment. Mm-hmm. And they're like a frog is the best example of that because they interact both in the aquatic realm and then in the terrestrial realm. They are an herbivore. I'm thinking about like tadpole, typical development. They're herbivores that have eyes that operate more like fish. Then they turn into carnivores with eyes that are like kind of totally different type of eye. They interact in so many different environmental niches.
Yeah.
That I just love them. I think that they're so cool. They're far enough away from me. I love mammals. They're kind of cool.
Yeah.
But they're just like, I don't know, it's a mammal. Like I
get it.
Like they're not exotic enough to my own frame of reference to learn as much as I can from some of these animals. And it's probably also like I'm a scientist, so I like replicates. So I like having like lots of different species to understand things.
Yeah.
If I were like really into emus or something giant, it'd be hard to do that with.
Really hard. Yeah. Emus, they are, there's a prohibitive nature to that scaling, right? And yeah, that's
I guess probably like tegus. If I was doing like large monitors, I'd have the same problem. Maybe when you're a mastix, but
Euros are a little easier than tegus, but harder than frogs. I can tell you that. But okay, that's awesome, man. Well, Andis, thank you so much. Do you have anywhere that you might direct anybody to follow what you do? I know you have your website, but anywhere else that people can find and interact with you or just see what you're up to?
Yeah, I mean, probably my website is the best. It's azandisresearch.com. And I publish a lot of stuff on there. Some of it's stats, some of it's AI related. And then I do also have my kind of herpetoculture website is Holotypica. So
oh, nice.
Holotypica. So like holotype.
Got it. Yeah.
Doctor specimen for species.
Right.
Holotypica.com.
Excellent. Okay,
awesome. I don't do that much on there because I'm pretty small scale, but
sure.
If you're interested in like the species I keep, that would be the place to go.
Awesome.
So if you want to read the papers that I've written or things like that, or get a hold of me in any other way, the Andis research is probably the way to go.
Fantastic. Well, Andis, that's awesome, man. I'm going to hit the stop the recording button.